Today we're going to look at changing those conditional statements we looked at in the last lesson. So we're starting with a conditional. If the measure of angle A equals 90 degrees, then it is right. So I have if, my hypothesis, then my conclusion. Our converse is a conditional statement where the original hypothesis and conclusion have been switched. So what that means is if I look at my hypothesis, in this one that's the measure of angle A, and then my conclusion, it is right, and remember it is that angle A, I am going to be switching, okay? So my key word here is switch. My new conditional statement, when I use the converse of this conditional statement, is still going to start with if, but then instead of saying the measure of angle A equals 90, I'm going to use the conclusion to write a new hypothesis. It is right, but I can't say if it is right because what is it, right? It was angle A. So if angle A is right, okay, then now I'm going to change my hypothesis so that it is the conclusion. So if angle A is right, then I'm still going to use measure of angle A because I need to use measure, and it's the easiest way to abbreviate. The measure of angle A equals 90 degrees. So this is the converse because my hypothesis and my conclusion have been switched. My blue part moved to the back and my orange part moved to the front. Okay? Inverse. To do the inverse of a conditional statement, and we always do these to the original conditional, not the last one we wrote. Okay? The inverse is a conditional statement where the original hypothesis and conclusion have been negated. And it's kind of like you think of it like opposite. It's like opposite day, right? Negated means you put like a not in there. Sometimes the sentences already have a not, so we say negate, and it just means kind of opposite, right? So if the measure of angle equals 90, then it is right. I need to change this, so I put a not somewhere in here and a not somewhere in here. And you want to put them where it makes sense, because a lot of times we'll say, if not, the measure of angle A equals 90. Well, that doesn't sound right, right? We say if the measure of angle A is not equal to 90. And that's really easy when it's an equation, because we're going to say if, and normally we have the measure of angle A equals 90. To change that into a not equals 90, all you have to do is put a slash through your equals. And now it's the measure of angle A is not equal to 90, then, so now I'm going to say it is right, but I need to put a not in there. And you want to put the not where it sounds the most natural, right? You wouldn't say then not it is right, or then it not is right. We would say then it is not right, okay? So you want to make sure that that word not goes where it makes sense. So then it is not right. Okay? All right. The third way we can change a conditional statement is called the contrapositive. And your contrapositive is a conditional statement where the original hypothesis and conclusion have been switched and negated. So the key word for converse I think of as switch. The key word for inverse I think of as negated, or sometimes I just tell myself the word not. And the key word I use for contrapositive, since we want to do both switch and negate, I just think to myself of the word both. And I remember I need to switch it and put a not somewhere in there. Okay? So I'm going to start with the orange part because I'm going to switch. So I'm going to say if. Now when I put a not in it here, I said if it is not right. But remember, we can't start with it because we need to know what it is. And we're talking about angle A. So and make sure that not goes where it makes sense. You wouldn't say if not angle A is right, right? We would say if angle A is not right, make sure I'm trying to color code here, not right, then we say angle A, the measure, is not equal to 90, right? So I'm just going to say the measure of angle A equals 90, but I want to put a not in there somewhere, and when we have equals, it's real easy because you just have to put a slash through it, and that means is not equal to 90. Okay? There's one more thing we could do. It's called the biconditional statement, and it can only be written if the original conditional and its converse are true. So if the original statement is true, and when you switch it, it's also true, then you can write what's called the biconditional statement. So let's look at this. If the measure of angle equals 90, then it's right. That is a true statement. Let's look at the converse. If angle A is right, then the measure of angle A is 90. Yes, that is also a true statement. So it's important to remember looking at your validity of each of these statements. This one is true. The original was true. If I look at my others, if the measure of angle A is not 90, then it's not right. That's also true. If it's not 90, that means it can't be right. It has to be obtuse or acute or straight or reflex, right? And then if angle A is not right, then it's not 90. That's also a true statement. Okay? So we can write our biconditional because the first two, the original and the converse, are both true. We can write a biconditional. Okay? Here's how we write a biconditional. Okay? We write it as conclusion. Then we use the words if and only if the hypothesis. Okay? So remember, my conclusion was it is right. But what was right? Angle A was right. So I'm going to start with angle A is right. I'm not putting an if in front of it. You see there's not an if or anything there. I'm just going to start with angle A is right. And then we put these words here, if and only if. It's the only way angle A can be right. If and only if. And then my hypothesis, remember my hypothesis was the measure of angle A is 90. So angle A is right if and only if the measure of angle A is equal to 90 degrees. Okay, so that's my biconditional statement, and remember you can only write this one if the original and the converse are both true. Okay? All right, so let's look at this first example. It says conditional. If the measure of angle A equals 42, then the angle is acute. So let's look at my hypothesis. The hypothesis is everything between if and then, not including if or then. So my hypothesis is the measure of angle A equals 42. And we probably should have a degrees there. Okay? My conclusion is everything that comes after then, and look, they didn't even use the word it. The angle is acute. Okay? All right, so converse. Remember the key word for converse is switch. So I'm going to start with if the conclusion, because I'm going to switch them. The angle is acute. If the angle, I don't even have to worry about the word it, the angle is acute, then, now my hypothesis, the measure of angle A equals 42 degrees. Okay, look at the next one. Write the inverse and determine its validity. So the inverse, the key word for inverse is not or negate. So I need to figure out where it's going to make the most sense to put it. I'm going to start with if. And I'm going back to the original conditional every time. So if the measure of angle A equals 42, but remember we want to put a not in there. So I'm going to say if the measure of angle A is not equal to 42, then we can say the angle is acute. I need to put a not in there where it makes most sense. So then not the angle is acute. That doesn't sound right. Then the not angle is acute. That doesn't sound right. Then the angle not is acute. Doesn't sound right. Then the angle is not acute. Oh, that sounds right. Then the angle is not acute. Okay, so I got my not right where it makes sense in the sentence. Okay, remember your contrapositive is both. So I'm going to do both on this one. So I'm going to switch it and I'm going to put a not in there where it makes sense. I'm going to start with if, and I'm going to switch it. So I'm going to start with my orange, my conclusion. The angle is acute, but I want to put a not in there, and we already figured out here where it makes most sense. The angle is not acute. If the angle is not acute, then the measure of angle 42 is not, or the measure of angle A is not 42, right? The measure of angle A equals 42, but we want to change that to is not equal to 42 degrees. Okay? And then it says, if possible, write the biconditional. The first one and the second one, the original and the converse, have to both be true. So let's look. If the measure of angle A is 42 degrees, then the angle is acute. Yes, that is a true statement. Okay, what about the second one? If the angle is acute, then the measure of angle A has to be 42. Well, that seems false, because an angle can be acute, but not 42 degrees. This one is false. If I wanted to give a counter example, I could say, well, maybe the measure of angle A instead of 42, maybe the angle, if it's acute, the angle could be, I don't know, 27. Anything that's not 42, right? Just because an angle's acute doesn't mean it has to be 42, right? Whereas up here, if my angle is right, then it did have to be 90. But an acute angle does not have to equal 42. Which means I can't write a biconditional statement. So no, I can't, because the converse is false. Okay? And if we look at the other validities, if the measure of angle A is not 42, then the angle is not acute. That's false for the same counterexample here. The measure of angle A, if it was 27, well, that's not 42, but my angle is still acute. So this one's false, and it's the same counterexample. What about this one? If the angle is not acute, then it's not 42. Well, that is a true statement, right? If an angle is not acute, then it can't equal 42 degrees. It has to be 90 or bigger, right, if it's not acute. So this is a true statement. So true, false, false, true. Okay? All right, we'll continue this in the next video, and we'll also talk about the total truth values you might possibly see when you're looking at the validities in these statements. Okay? Thank you so much for watching.